Stephen McAlpine joins us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah,
Great to have
thank
you with us, mate. And I came across an article that you wrote. You wrote it a little earlier this year, but I was reading it recently and thought, oh, well, this is a really interesting thought. And I guess we've all seen and heard, about the Christians that are very publicly and prominently, walked away from their faith. They say, oh, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm deconverting, all these different terms that we hear. But you've kind of, I guess, obviously that's a concerning situation. But you're picking up on, I guess, the reverse of that, which is where Christians kind of very, very quietly walk away from their faith, or just, I guess maybe have some struggles, some doubts, some questions, and then think, then they sort of just, head off, slide left sort of thing. And you calling that quiet quitting. That's quite an interesting and I guess probably a more concerning situation, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think that's right. And I obviously got it from the whole work situation at the moment. Post-COVID, people are quiet quitting at work, sort of quietly folding their wings and not being involved, and then sort of they could sidle out the door if they had another job. But in the church situation, it was much more over 20, 30 years of being involved in church ministries, just seeing that some people just, we just don't notice that it happens, and that people, it's the irregularity and it's the lure of other things. And Hebrews in the Bible tells us not to be careful that we don't drift away. And that doesn't sound like a massive explosion. That sounds like a gentle, quiet, over time, I don't believe this anymore, doesn't shape my life. And I think that's very hard to grapple with, and it's a big danger, I think, in our modern world, which has so much to offer us.
Oh,
yeah.
And we can get so busy. We have a thing, and because we've seen other friends do it, and it's just a simple little thing. My kids can play sport. I love them to play sport, but you can't play sport on a Sunday because we need to go to church. But you don't think about that because you want to give your kids the opportunities to do everything. But once you do that, it can be a downhill, slippery slope because you're not regularly, getting together with Christians, which then can start, maybe we don't need to,
Oh, yeah, look, I grew up in Northern Ireland, and, that's the place where they chained up the swings on Sunday so you wouldn't have fun. But the flip side is, it's okay. And I can see both sides. But for me and our family, we've gone, no, actually, Sundays are together at church and together with God's people, because the bad life could take your family away from Jesus, but the good life is just as likely to do it. And it's more alluring, and it looks less problematic. So I think the good life in Australia has so much to offer. Most people in Australia, it's heaven on a stick, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very alluring, and that's where quiet quitting, I think, works in our lives in the Western setting, especially, I think.
Yeah,
that's right.
So true.
Well, it's interesting. I know that in the Gospels, Jesus talks about the idea of the cares of the world, and even the deceitfulness of wealth is another thing. As you say, we're very blessed in Australia. We can become so just caught up in being successful and having more stuff, and that can even be something that draws us away. So it's this sort of, I guess, concept that Jesus talked about a couple of millennia ago that really we're observing in our world today, aren't we?
Yeah, look, and I think that's the thing. If you're living in a setting where everything is laid on tap, it's very easy as a Christian to sort of, I don't need to steep myself in God's word and His promises. Prayer, I've got everything. I don't really feel like I need to. And you can quiet quit personally as much as you can in a church setting. And it's just that drift, because, as you're saying, it's the lure of wealth, the desire for other things that make us unfruitful. And Jesus uses that as one of the soils, like that's there. And it was there even in his day. You think, I wouldn't want to live in first century Palestine with a Roman occupation. And he still said there, money and lure of wealth and ease can still take you away. So it's ubiquitous, I think, across cultures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. So how do we, I guess maybe if we're identifying, maybe we've had that drift happening personally or within our family or people that we care for, what's some ways that we can, I guess, overcome or try to push back against that?
Well, I think one of the things growing up, my experience was as a young Christian that you'd have the mountaintop experience at the end of the year at the church camp or the youth group camp. And I think the alternative to quiet quitting, or the antidote to it, is quiet continuing. It's actually little things. Because if you say, I want you to do that big task now, you won't sustain it. But if you just dial everything up a little bit, like I'm going to spend a little bit more time with God's people. I'm going to offer to help someone somewhere for the sake of Jesus. I'm going to just pray a little bit more, or in my anxiety. I think the Christian life is a case of dialing everything up slowly over time, and or the opposite of it is dialing everything down slowly over time. That's the common garden variety.
That's
quiet
right.
quitting or quiet continuing, I think.
Wow.
That's good. So it's kind of like the old frog in the pot situation, isn't it? You know, like the water's boiling, progressively. The frog doesn't realise that there's a change happening, but and that can, as you say, can either be for the positive or for the negative.
Yeah, look, I don't think we need to be ninja Christians tomorrow. We just got to dial. That's my favourite saying at the moment. But it's like you've got to dial it up just slowly because you've got a Christian life to live over time. And I remember speaking to someone at a funeral, a bunch of guys who've been really strong Christians when I grew up, and they were real influential to me. And none of them were Christians, and none of their wives were Christians anymore. And I said, what happened? I was waiting for some big, terrible story. And they said, oh, nothing, just a quiet, slow, downward path to not believing. And I went, oh, that's how it happens.
Wow.
That's quiet quitting.
Yeah. And that's probably the silent killer that we don't hear about. People just slowly and utterly drift off. So maybe it's also time for us to check in with our friends that we haven't seen at church for a bit.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I think we have to remember we're doing this in community.
Yeah.
And that's critical.
Yeah, that's right, because we can all encourage one another, which is what the Bible talks about. So, look, some really great points you're raising, Stephen, and we'll put the link to this article on Facebook as well, so people can easily find it. But it's really a great encouragement, and as you say, I think it's something that's happening more than we probably even realise. So we certainly need to be, as you say, dialing things back up again, and it's probably just as simple as I always, I like to even recite the Lord's Prayer because it's got those regular reminders. But give us this day our daily bread, like just that. God, I just need what I need for today, but keep pressing into it rather than sort of stepping back away from it. So, great reminder, Stephen.
Oh, thanks heaps. And look, don't forget things like social media can help you as well as hinder you. But there's lots of good little things on social media that you can just contact friends, dial into Bible stuff on just a drip-by-drip basis. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, good point. Well, your website, stephenmcalpine.com, is where people can find this article. It's called Hey Christian, Don't Quite Quit Your Faith. But as I said, we'll put a link on Facebook for it to you find it easily. But Stephen, really appreciate your time today, and thanks again for sharing with us.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks heaps.